Well, the political pulse of the country is racing as Parliament is set to resume and voters go to the polls in key by-elections in Montreal and Winnipeg. But the pulse of the federal carbon tax is growing weaker and slower and fainter as more and more political leaders distance themselves from the policy.
We want to see an approach to fighting the climate crisis where it doesn't put the burden on the backs of working people, where big polluters have to pay their fair share, they have to pay the price of their pollution, but it shouldn't be on working people's shoulders.
Now, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has made comments like that before, but the political circumstances have changed with the end of the Supply and Confidence Agreement, and they've changed so much that even the NDP Premier of British Columbia says carbon pricing's days could be numbered.
If the federal government decides to remove the legal backstop requiring us to have a consumer carbon tax in British Columbia, we will end the consumer carbon tax in British Columbia.
It all leaves the federal Liberals increasingly isolated as the champions of carbon pricing. And a week after Singh ripped up their deal, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau ripped Singh.
I do believe that Jagmeet Singh and the NDP actually do care about the environment. It's just increasingly obvious that they have no idea what to do to fight against climate change. And one of the first things they do after walking away from that agreement to deliver progressive things for Canadians is walk away from any plan to fight climate change.
And that is where we start with our panel of insiders. Greg MacEachern is a former Liberal ministerial staffer. Fred DeLorey is a former Conservative campaign manager. And Mélanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. So what I want from all three of you is your plan to replace the... No, just kidding. Fred, it's good to see you all. It's been a week. There's a lot to talk about. We're going to start with that. Fred, this is the issue you really wanted to talk about, and it's an obvious one to talk about with Jagmeet Singh saying what he did. And David Eby, the province has started it all in Canada. Saying what he did.
No, it's great to see Jagmeet Singh for a second week in a row following Pierre Poilievre's path. Last week he tore up the SACA agreement with the Liberals at Poilievre's request, and this week he's now...
Yes, that's exactly what it was.
It's exactly what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. And I think that's the problem here with the NDP, is that it looks like, maybe not that they're following Poilievre, I'm obviously justing there, but that he's abandoning a lot of his plans here to come across now and to question the carbon tax. It's fascinating. And then see Eby do it in BC, like you said, the birthplace of the Canadian carbon tax, the BC Liberals, when they brought that in under Gordon Campbell. But what is interesting here is, I think, there's actually a path for the Liberals. There are a number of Canadians that do believe in a carbon tax. It's not a big percentage, but it's a percentage. And right now, we have the progressive vote, that NDP Liberal vote is split. If you look at the polls, you know, the Conservatives are all, every Conservative vote is kind of united with the Conservative Party, where the Liberals and the NDP are split in half. So it could be a strategic error for the NDP that they've done this, and it gives room for the Liberals to go after that progressive vote.
You could also throw the Bloc Québécois into that mix when you're bringing it into Quebec, for sure. So Mel, on this, I mean, okay, you want to move away from consumer carbon tax as the federal NDP. What are you going to do? I mean, you've torn up SACA. You say you want to differentiate yourself. What's the differentiation?
Right. Well, this is now the second week that you've asked me about policy pieces, and I'm going to remind you that I'm a communications person, so I'm going to stick on the communications.
Sure.
But just to remind folks, and this is a little bit complicated because obviously when the carbon tax was brought in, the political divisiveness around the carbon tax wasn't really a thing. You know, you mentioned it was the BC Liberals that brought it in British Columbia. It wasn't actually the BC NDP. And when the BC NDP came in, they said, why change something that everybody's united on, that seems to be working? We're going to keep on that. But for federal New Democrats, and actually New Democrats in BC as well, they've always been uncomfortable with the consumer carbon tax, particularly the federal one, because it exempts a lot of the big emitters. And that's something that I remember being in the war room in 2019, trying to explain to journalists that actually we think there's a different path, and the fact that the biggest emitters are paying not less, but in comparison less to what regular Canadians are. The NDP didn't think that was right at the time, and they still don't think that's right.
Right.
So they've always been uncomfortable about this. I think the difference now is in this cost of living crisis that people are feeling, they see that difference a little bit more. I know we see stats about how people are getting bigger rebates and it's affecting them. I'm getting a bigger rebate than it's affecting me, absolutely. You know, my sister and my brother-in-law who are living in the country are not seeing that difference, right? They're they're paying more with the carbon tax. So in this time where the carbon tax has become this hot potato where people don't really understand what it does. Yes, they do want to fight the climate crisis, but they don't think that they should be the only ones fighting it. I hear you on how the Liberals can make themselves a differentiator on this. I think overall there is an opportunity to talk about fighting the climate crisis outside of the carbon tax that is actually the real opportunity here. And I think by hopping on that, and particularly when it relates to those big profits, those big companies that are not paying what regular folks are, I think that's where the opportunity is, and that's an opportunity for the NDP.
Yeah, well, Greg, just to get into policy just for a second, I mean, some of the big companies do have exemptions, yes, but it's because they're trade exposed. And if you hammer them hard in Canada, they'd export the jobs and the pollution to, say, the United States or somewhere else, and you don't actually reduce global emissions, and you just lose the economic activity. So there are some deals you have to make in a policy like this to keep it going. But like here we are now that your party really, the cheese stands alone on consumer carbon pricing right now. I mean, is this a crisis or is this an opportunity, as Fred would suggest?
I think that if you believe in you believe that Canada needs to do something on climate change, this is ultimately politically beneficial for the Liberals. If this was politically expedient, the Liberals could have abandoned it a long time ago. And the NDP have abandoned this. And if you look at, I'm just struck by the number of political scientists, people who watch politics, supporters of the NDP, columnists at the, Max Fawcett at the National Observer. Like the response to Singh doing this has been hugely negative. And it goes back to what Fred said. It does feel like he's flailing for the second week in a row. I'll pull it back to what Mel wants to talk about, communications. If you thought that in 2019, why is he not ready for an answer now? The same way with the supply and confidence agreement, his interview with you. He did not seem to have sure-footed answers about why he's doing what he's doing. If he wanted to do this, then absolutely do it, but tell us what else you're going to do, because that's what everybody is saying about the Conservatives. And Fred might have sounded a bit flip at the beginning of this, that he's doing what the Conservatives want him to do, but that is actually the headline of a couple of columns about what the NDP are doing here. I find it really strange. Look, let's just pull it back. The boiling frog, if you throw a frog in boiling water, it's going to jump out. But if we're immersed in it and the heat rises, we just get accustomed to it. And that's what I feel like we're doing. We're a country that is facing wildfires and floods. I'm from a province that is hanging on by its fingertips to New Brunswick because of rising sea levels. Yeah. Last year, after Hurricane Fiona, a couple of weeks later, I'm driving through rural Nova Scotia, and I'll never forget looking out the window and seeing a barn upside down. And we seem to be okay with not doing anything about this. If we want to ask other countries, we need to work together to lower emissions. We need to do something as well. And let's not forget, Fred, you ran a campaign and your leader, Erin O'Toole, had a carbon pricing plan. There are Conservatives, Preston Manning, who believe in this, but it has just become, like we see Premier Eby, it's become very politically expedient. And this might be one of those things where the Liberals take the big political hit, but I think in the long term, they'll be able to say, we tried to do something and everybody else just walked away.
Okay, I mean, you can't do things on climate without a consumer carbon price. Yes, you can go cap and trade, you can do other things like Quebec doesn't have it,
why
right?
didn't the NDP leader tell you that?
No, I understand, but this is my point. It's like if you're going to say this doesn't work, and I know you want to talk comms, not policy, comms is we're going to do this instead. And what they said is we're working on it.
Right. Well, but I think that's part of, this is the election cycle that we're in, right? We're a year away from the election. They're building what that platform is. They're not going to, sure, they probably could have had an answer of this is what we're going to do. But they're going to want to release that plan with a lot of fanfare, and they're going to want to make sure that it's a moment, not a thing that they say in response. They're going to want to build opportunity and use it as a moment to go into the next election. Now that being said, though, you know what you were just talking about, the NDP has put forward in the House and in their conversations with the Liberals many different policy alternatives, like stopping the subsidies that we're giving oil and gas, like capping the profits and using those funds to then make it less expensive for people to heat their homes. And both the Liberals and the Conservatives have said no to all of those policies.
But why didn't he bring those up?
All right, well, Fred, hop in.
So the thing with Jagmeet, I think this is a major failure really on communications, not so much policy, is he should be saying nothing until he has something. He doesn't have the new policy yet. Whatever that is, whatever they're working on, he should just be quiet and then come out with that. Instead of going out and saying, yeah, we're not so sure about this and someday we'll have this. That is not leadership. It doesn't look good on him. I think it's a mistake.
So I can imagine, I mean, Parliament gets going on Monday. We don't know when the first oppo day is going to be, but a non-confidence motion from someone in the Conservative caucus saying we vote non-confidence in this government over its carbon tax plan because too much of the brunt is borne on the shoulders of workers, or whatever the language was that Jagmeet Singh used.
Don't do their homework for
Well, yeah, come on, they're more cunning than I am. It wedges them pretty bad.
It totally wedges him. It gives the Conservatives the opportunity to use his own words, and will he stand up and vote this way?
So, I mean, Greg, how do you do that, right? If your own words, like word for word, is put into a non-confidence motion, if I was a blank disturber, that's what I would be doing in a non-confidence motion in Parliament at the earliest possibility.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this. This is what happens when you end the supply and confidence agreement and you don't really have a good answer of why. I mean, it's going to be which rake does the NDP leader want to step on this week? This is, they've brought this on themselves. They could have done the end of this later in the session. They could have waited to the spring. They telegraphed that they were going to do this. So it leads people like me who watch way too much politics with an expectation that when you do this, you're going to come out with something like, wow, that was a really strong, moment from the NDP leader. 2 weeks in a row, we're not able to say that.
So Mel, I wonder, I was struck today watching the Prime Minister. We're used to seeing him say very critical things about Pierre Poilievre, and we are used to Jagmeet Singh saying very critical things about Justin Trudeau, even while Sackett was still alive. Trudeau doesn't have to worry about being nice to him anymore, and we saw that today. And it seems like this is a whole new dynamic we're going to see with the Prime Minister lashing out aggressively in all directions.
Right. Well, I think, again, you obviously believe certain things. I obviously believe very different things. When I was looking at the Prime Minister today, the same thing as what I think I saw last week is a little bit of condescension talking to the NDP, like, shame on the NDP. They're going to figure it out eventually. And I don't think that that's particularly persuasive to voters. So we'll see. But to go back on the timing and the response, and maybe later down in the session, I think the NDP need to do all of this before the session started. We're a year away from an election, if not sooner. They needed to get out of the deal. They needed to figure out where they stood on these issues that people are worried about and are paying attention to, and I think that's what we saw with these two things.
So Fred, as Greg pointed out, you had carbon pricing in your platform in 2021.
Rewards program or
A
something?
rewards program, yes. It was the CBC that informed your caucus of the existence of such a thing.
We still got to talk about that.
We do, yeah. I'm not going to tell you how I got a copy of the plan, but I got a copy of the plan.
Remember, I got the email saying you got the plan.
Yeah, I know. It was a fun time. But we have no idea what the current Conservative leadership is going to do. We know they're going to axe the tax. We don't know if that applies to just the consumer tax, the clean fuel standard. Does it also apply to industrial pricing, which has profound trade implications for a country like Canada? If you want to have a carbon tax election, and if you want to bring down the government at the earliest opportunity, and the NDP are moving, and there's gaps there on what they're going to do, shouldn't the Conservatives at some point lay out their alternative? Like, are they going to do anything realistic on climate?
They will absolutely have a plan of some sort on the environment. How, what standard does it meet for different folks? I don't know. We'll see that during the election, though. They're not going to do it before. To do that now, again, say nothing until you have something. They're also working on all of their programs right now. You don't just, he's been leader for 2 years. You don't just walk in and have your whole platform done. And I've worked with Mr. Poilievre for many years. He is a meticulous individual who goes through everything. So I'm sure every single T and I in the platform, he will approve, and every punctuation and everything in it. So it's going to be a process. There will be a plan on the environment. It will not include a carbon tax.
Greg, it feels like they must have something. They've done 4 or 5 confidence motions now, right, to try to have an election. You must have a platform ready to go, right? Or is this just theater?
It may be theater. I mean, I do believe that the Conservatives have been very dependent, and their confidence is very much based on polling. And we've seen in the United States that events can change the dynamic really, really quickly. When I was in Nova Scotia a couple of times over the summer, I had a lot of people come up to me and say, Greg, your guy has to go, but boy, I don't like that other guy. And I think from what I'm told of, the people who work in the focus group world in Canada, they hear the same thing. And we've seen some polling that have said that those people who are aware of who the Conservative leader is, about half of them have some issues with him. This would be the time for perhaps the Liberals to start doing some ads. Perhaps we'll see them this fall about that.
There was some loose discussion of that, I think, in Nanaimo, that we might see some contrast ads. I don't know. Mel, last word to you on this. I mean, Jagmeet Singh is the new question. It seems it used to be, why don't you tear up SACA? Well, he's done that, and now it's like, what is your climate plan? Seems like that's going to hound him a little bit until he gives an answer on it.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know that that's what most regular folks are looking at. I think they're trying to figure out who
But not
he
regular
is.
folks on Parliament Hill, though, right?
Exactly. They're not regular folks on Parliament Hill, but the opportunity when you're talking to folks on Parliament Hill is to
I
talk
hear
to
ya.
regular folks at home, right? So I don't know that that's what people are asking on the doorstep. I think people who are on the doorstep are asking, yes, they care about the climate, yes, they want something done about it, but they are more worried about how they're going to put food on the table next day, how they're keeping a roof over their head. So I think when they're talking to people, it's really important to hear what they have to say, and when the time is right to really give that plan.
Okay.